haven't come to visit us in a while. Historical myths about different countries, to Germany, to Japan, France, and even the Russian Empire we have already dismantled. It's time for the cherry on the cake. And her, as you might have guessed, will be the United States of America. Unique in case history. Roman Empire superpower level view, born by historical standards just yesterday. Hence, everything in her story is well documented. From that and funnier, some myths about us history. They are quoted even in American textbooks. For example, the myth of that us residents are descendants of British. Admit almost all of us. If we do not hold an equal sign between two states, then at least we consider them something like brothers, where the younger deposed the elder from the throne. Friends, not even close so. You can start here with the first 4 European colonies in a new world. English was exactly 0. Port Royal and Fort Carolina were founded by French Huguenots, and St. Augustine and Fort San Juan are Spaniards. The first European language in a new light was Spanish. English in America appeared half a century later. It will become even more fun if you look at the 2020 census. Descendants of British immigrants. 25 million people called themselves, and 49 million people called themselves ancestors. Drumming Germans. State, which kind of only held a candle at all, while for the us dealt with France, Britain, Spain, and even the Russian Empire. But the reality is, what exactly are Germans? Largest ethnic group of the United States, and it's not about jokes about that. Where did the Germans escape in 1945? 3 centuries before them organized and not very crossed into a new world, everyone who is not lazy, and the Germans who, if that in the 17th century, a single state and did not spell, ran in first rows, just happened like this, that winning the big game for the colonies would have won the British Empire, and all this motley party from the English, French, Germans, Spaniards and other people simply learned English. To live was corny more comfortable. Exactly as well. How in continental Europe everyone learned French. American War of Independence. This is not British conflict. British settlers in a new light. The conflict between the British Empire and its rebellious colonies. People who already considered themselves Americans, regardless of who came to America from where. But even so, there were nuances. After all, the first official census of 1790 showed 1 in 10 Americans still speaks German. Father of Frederick Muhlenberg, first Speaker of Congress in 1789. For example, born in Germany, and at one time took part in working on the bill. Mandatory official translation of all laws into German, he got rejected with only 1 vote difference. The United States could have been founded as a country with 2 document languages inside the states. By the way, a separate historical. Some schools even tell that German father founders of the USA wanted to make the second state language, but as we already told, this is not true. It was only about translating laws. Well, back to the first settlers. Let's talk about one more myth, in the distribution of which Repent partly took part, and we. The myth is that first settlers in a new light were all adventurers, dissidents, criminals, and people which did not live in Europe. There really were many such cases. January 1st, 733, King George II of Britain commissioned James Oglethorpe creating a colony where prisoners from dead prisons will be relocated. They in Britain were crowded, and Oglethorpe fulfilled the will of the king. This is how the province of Georgia and its capital Savannah appeared, which stands to this day. However, did everyone go to debt jails because of fraud? And how many people were there who are just unlucky? Open question. But even if you forget about him, hundreds of 1,000 Puritans remain. Britain at the dawn of the 17th century kept religiously storming. If briefly, the Pope forbade King Henry VII to divorce his uncomfortable wife and rushed the Anglican Church. Toliki and Puritania mutually dragged each other by the underpants, stalked and, depending on whose supporter is in power, oppressed in every way. That came out like this. That aboard that very ship of Pilgrim's Mayflower, which starts as history, basically were haunted Puritans. Were they criminals, lumpens, or adventurers? Of course not. Rather opposite. The situation developed by black. Funny because the Mayflower. What next ships were hammered mostly by wealthy enough people who suddenly realized that on another continent servants don't bring tea, and eating secret is trying to kill you. Hence own and scary. Mortality in the ranks of the first colonists. Agree if the first colonists were seekers, adventurers and criminals. Hardly the death rate in Jamestown would be 80%. Gearheads just the same survive train perfectly. the story of Sir Walter Raleigh, which being favorite of Queen Elizabeth, founded the first settlement in America in 1955, as much as 20 years earlier than officially first Jamestown. Roanoke Colony rarely recalls in textbooks, because the Honourable Sir stuffed the ships with nobles, naturalists, scientists and artists. In general, all those who can write a book, but about kindling a campfire has a very distant representation. Ended the settlement yelling it to tie. Disappearance of all residents. But that's another story. Always that outright criminals and fugitives. In British America, there wasn't much, certainly less running for religious reasons Puritans. Related to them is the following myth about freedom. What romantic colonists wrote to a new world for religious freedom, carved in stone by any tutorial. Reality, unfortunately, not so rainbow, and Puritan did not get first colonies. First thing, of course, began to strangle representatives of other religions. Actually, in most colonies before the 17th century vote, only Puritan church members could, and the laws forbade Jews and Christians, hold public office. Even in the original US Constitution, there is no word on the separation of church and state. Some states could calmly install the official religion and forbid Gentiles to poop. Freedom of religion amendment, accepted only in 1791. Yes, and then it remained the subject of much controversy. The subject of controversy in the United States has never been democracy. Ironically, because the question of its prisons was not on the agenda of the Founding Fathers. John Adams, founder of USA, who dealt with this issue, literally wrote that states is a land of laws, and not people, and democracy is not on the agenda. In this regard, Adams suggested using mixed system with alimony as many as 3 styles. Monarchy in the person of the president, aristocracy represented by the Senate, democracy in the House of Representatives. The system works to this day, albeit with small changes. So until 1913 in the US people didn't elect senators. They were appointed between Saboychik at the highest level, and the word voting there had a very figurative meaning. Now senators of the population still chooses. System established by the Founding Fathers, still standing. In the first, it is that you can sit in Congress as long as you want, but in the second, that us residents never elect a president. This is what electors do, which was most evident in 2000, when Albert Gore got more votes than George Bush, but the president still became the last. This is a separate and long story. Our will continue the War of Independence, which, like any conflict, has acquired myths, legends and romance, where without her, perhaps the main legend, is the legend of the struggle for freedom of oppressed colonies, which Britain held with an iron grip. In reality, as any traveller will tell you, in time everything was exactly the opposite. The cause of the US Independence War, just in that Britain ruled the colonies in a new light. Perfidically, it is important not to confuse the concept as not loyal to the colonies, namely don't care. There were reasons for that. The Treaty of Paris of 1763, ending the 7-Year War. Britain gained colossal territories in America, Canada East, Mississippi, Florida, Grenada, St. Vincent, and other stuff. As already mentioned, they were inhabited far from British, and what is more important to make a profit is decidedly unclear. Here are the real reasons for the War of Independence. Nutrition Corny did not have time to build a normal control system, and on the other hand, for squeezing, recourse to the services of private corporations, who are gaining financial and political weight in America. In general, then do not care about that Britain started. Why pay tax to someone who is overseas? Also in conditions when inconsistent politics, the British Empire led to, and radical changes in economic policy from a military point of view. Not to say that war for independence was the battle of David against Goliath. Should not forget that explosive population rate. Planet started growing from the 19th, but for real since the 20th century, and in 1775 at the beginning of the conflict, Britain was inhabited by ±8 million people, as in turn about 31 million. Some of them of course supported Britain, but the ruthless ocean at least equalizes the odds, even being Britain in place of Mexico. Difference between economies and demographics was not so monstrous. To talk about David and Goliath, so underestimate the achievements of British troops in conflict is not worth it. They were fighting not with Indians, and with an almost equal army. To be more precise, army. We fought for independence in the United States, not one. Is a thing which in general everyone and in all textbooks forget. 1778 France entered the war on the US side. since 1779 Spain, and since 1780 Holland, and from France in general officially fought expeditionary corps of 10,000 people each for those days' huge army. And what is more important was the undercover army navy that American soldiers were critical. The last major battle of the American Revolution, there was a siege of Yorktown. Exactly after losing in it, Britain begins peace talks, but accepted surrender. In Yorktown, 2 people on each side, from Britain to British, and from USA, American, and French. This is To the Word, about white flags and the terrible military history of France.